I found the book on a Tuesday night. At the time, I was working part-time at a university library while finishing my degree. The library was enormous. 5 floors, thousands of books, and several sections that were rarely visited after midnight. My job was mostly boring. I reshelved books, checked returns, and helped close the building. That Tuesday, I was working the late shift. Around 11:40 p.m., I was putting books back on the 4th floor when I noticed one sitting on the floor between 2 shelves. It was old. Very old. The cover was dark brown leather with no title on the front. I picked it up and checked the spine. Nothing. There was no barcode either. I assumed someone had brought it from home and accidentally left it there. I opened the first page. There was only one sentence. "This book belongs to whoever finds it." I laughed. I thought it was some kind of joke. I flipped through the pages. Most of them were blank. Then I noticed writing near the back. A date. Tomorrow's date. Underneath it was a short paragraph. I read it twice. It described a student dropping a stack of books near the main entrance. The strange thing was that the description included the student's name. I checked the clock. It was almost midnight. I put the book back on the shelf. The next morning, around 9:15, I was working near the entrance when I heard a loud crash. A student had dropped a stack of books. I recognized him immediately. Same name, same clothes, same books described in the paragraph. I stood there staring. Then I remembered the book. I ran upstairs. It was gone. I searched the shelf. Nothing. I checked the surrounding shelves. Nothing. I asked another employee if she'd seen it. She said no. I assumed someone had taken it until that evening. The book was sitting on my desk. I hadn't brought it home. Nobody had seen me put it there. I opened it. The pages were no longer blank. There was another entry. Tomorrow's date again. This time, it described me. It said I would stay late. It said I would walk through the east wing. It said I would hear someone call my name. And then it said, "Do not answer." I closed the book. I decided I wasn't going to stay late. At 8 p.m., I left the library. I went home. The next morning, the book was sitting outside my apartment door. I hadn't told anyone where I lived. I didn't touch it. I called my supervisor. She asked what the book looked like. I described it. There was a long silence. Then she asked me to come to her office. She pulled up an old library inventory system. She searched the description. Nothing. Then she searched the university archives. Still nothing. Finally, she opened an old photograph. It showed the library's 4th floor. The photograph had been taken almost 40 years earlier. I saw the book immediately. It was sitting on the same shelf where I had found it. I pointed at the screen. How long has that book been there? My supervisor didn't answer. Instead, she told me something that made my stomach tighten. The 4th floor had been closed for almost 20 years before the library was renovated. Nobody had access to that section during that time. I asked her why. She said a librarian had disappeared there. His name was Daniel. He had been working the night shift. One evening, he never came home. They searched the entire building. They never found him. But according to the old staff reports, he'd complained about a strange book, a book that kept appearing in different sections. I asked what happened to the book. She said, "We don't know." Then she looked at me. "Why?" I told her everything. She became visibly nervous. Then she said, "Don't read the next page." I went home. The book was waiting outside my apartment. I took it inside. I know I shouldn't have, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. The next page contained a description of what I was doing at that exact moment. It described my apartment, my desk, my chair, even the cup of coffee beside me. Then I reached the final paragraph. It said, "At 12:14, he will hear someone knocking." I looked at the clock, 12:13. Then I closed the book. At exactly 12:14, 3 knocks came from my bedroom door. I lived alone. I didn't move. 3 more knocks. Then a voice whispered my name. I stayed completely silent. The voice came again. "Open the book." I looked down. The book had opened by itself. A new sentence was appearing on the page. I watched the letters form. "He shouldn't have brought it home." Then another line appeared. "Now it knows where you live." I threw the book into the trash. The next morning, it was gone. I never found it again. I quit the library shortly afterward. I was the night security guard at a public library for almost 3 years. The job was easy. After closing, I walked through every floor, checked the emergency exits, made sure nobody was hiding in the building, and locked the doors. Most nights, nothing happened. Then, one winter night, I heard something between the shelves. It sounded like footsteps. Slow footsteps. I was on the 2nd floor when I heard them. I stopped. The footsteps stopped too. I waited. Nothing. I continued walking. A few seconds later, the footsteps started again. They were coming from behind me. I turned around. The aisle was empty. I checked the security cameras. Nothing unusual. I assumed it was an animal, maybe a mouse. I continued my patrol. Then I heard a book fall. I walked toward the sound. A large history book was lying open on the floor. I picked it up. As I stood, I noticed something scratched into the wooden shelf. 3 long marks. I looked around. Nothing. I put the book back. Then I heard breathing. Not my breathing. Something was breathing from the other side of the shelf. Slow, heavy, wet. I stepped backward. The breathing stopped. I didn't investigate. I went downstairs. The next night, I heard it again. This time, I was on the 3rd floor. The footsteps were moving between the shelves. I checked the cameras. Again, nothing. But then, I noticed something strange. One of the cameras was pointed directly at an aisle. The aisle was empty. Then, a shadow crossed the camera. I looked at the monitor. The shadow had moved from one side of the aisle to the other. There was nothing visible creating it. I rewound the footage. The shadow appeared again. It was tall, too tall, and it moved in a way that didn't look human. I told my supervisor the next morning. He became unusually serious. He asked me which aisle. I told him. He said, "Don't go there alone." I asked why. He wouldn't explain. That night, I found an old maintenance room behind the third-floor shelves. I'd never noticed the door before. Inside were old boxes. I searched through them. Most contained building records. Then I found a folder marked Archive, 1987.
Inside were reports about strange incidents in the library. Books disappearing, shelves being damaged, employees refusing to work after dark. One report caught my attention. It mentioned a night guard who claimed that something was living inside the walls. He described hearing it move between the shelves. Then there was one final note: do not allow it into the reading room. I thought it was ridiculous until I heard something behind me. I turned. The maintenance room door was open. Something was standing in the hallway. At first, I thought it was a person. It was tall, extremely thin. Its arms hung almost to its knees. Its skin looked pale beneath the emergency lights. But its face, I couldn't properly see it. It seemed like the features were in the wrong places. I stepped backward. The creature didn't move. Then it tilted its head. I heard a sound, not a growl, not a voice, something between the two. I ran. I locked myself inside the security office. For almost an hour, I heard movement outside. Books falling, shelves scraping, something walking slowly down the hallway. Then everything became silent. I checked the cameras. The third floor was empty. I waited until morning. When the first employee arrived, I told him what happened. He didn't laugh. He simply said, "You saw it." I asked him what it was. He said nobody knew. According to the old records, it had been appearing in the library for decades, but it never attacked anyone. It only appeared after midnight, and it always stayed between the shelves. I asked why. He looked at me. Because it can't enter the reading room. I asked what would happen if it did. He didn't answer. Instead, he told me to check the third floor. I refused. He went himself. A few minutes later, he came back carrying something. A children's book. It was covered in dust. He placed it on the desk. Then he opened it. Every page contained the same drawing. A tall, thin figure standing between bookshelves. The final page was different. It showed the reading room, and the creature was standing inside it. The employees stared at the page. Then he whispered, "This wasn't here yesterday." That was when we heard the library doors unlock. The front doors opened by themselves. We looked at the security monitor. The reading room was empty, but the lights were turning on one by one, starting from the far end. Something was walking toward the desk. We couldn't see it, only its shadow. It moved slowly across the floor. The employee grabbed my arm. "Don't move." The shadow stopped. Then a hand appeared around the corner. Long fingers, pale skin. It slowly curled around the edge of the wall. I couldn't breathe. Then the employee whispered something. "Close your eyes." I asked why. He said, "Because it learns faces." We closed our eyes. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard breathing directly beside me. Something was standing inches away. I could feel cold air against my face. I kept my eyes closed. Then the breathing stopped. The front door slammed shut. When I opened my eyes, the reading room was empty. The preacher was gone. So was the children's book. I quit the next morning. I never returned to that library. But about a year later, I saw a news article about the building. The library had closed permanently after a series of unexplained incidents. The article included a photograph of the reading room. I zoomed in. Between two shelves at the very back, something was standing there, tall, thin, watching the camera. And beneath the photograph, someone had written a comment from an anonymous account. "It isn't between the shelves anymore."